Well, welcome everyone to our November webinar, Preventing PKI Outages with PKI Spotlight. If you've noticed from a webinar perspective, we haven't really kind of spent any time talking about our flagship product called PKI Spotlight, but we've gotten a lot of inquiries from folks that would like to see a demo of it. So this is going to be a demo, but before we get into the demo, I want to kind of do a little bit of a presentation to start it off. So Lindsay, if you can kind of go to the next slide. So today you're going to be, you have me, you've seen me before. Brad Butlick, I'm the Director of Sales here at PKI Solutions and kind of a crypto geek. I've loved this PKI and crypto stuff since literally the late 90s. And I've made a career of it, and it's been a good career, and I'm very happy that to do this. We're also being joined by Lindsay Bell. And Lindsay, I don't know, have you been in one of these webinars recently?
No, it's been a hot minute.
So Lindsay is an incredibly integral part of the PKI Solutions organization. He is the product director for the PKI Spotlight product. So probably the reason you haven't seen him is because we haven't done a demo of it, but we're going to be doing a demo as part of this presentation. So let's move on to the next slide so we can get into this. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple things. We're going to kind of do a little bit of a background on why PKIs are so important. And I'm going to also talk about why PKIs fail, which is kind of the topic here. And we're going to kind of I'm going to go into a horror story that occurred earlier this year with regard to a failure in PKI and how it affected the organization. And then we're going to do a little bit of the presentation that I'm going to turn over to Lindsay, which is going to be what I call a partial PKI Spotlight demo. This is just going to be concentrating on the aspects associated with the resilience of a PKI. But as many of you might know, PKI Spotlight is more than just a resilience monitor. It's also a security monitor. We're going to kind of gloss over the security aspects of it in this webinar. And if you're interested, there's going to be a question at the end of the webinar that's going to allow you to say, hey, I'd like more information or I'd like to see a demo. Please feel free to select that, and we'll be contacting you to schedule one. And then we'll just wrap it off with a summary. So next slide, please. So why are PKIs so important? This is kind of where I think a lot of us in the PKI space are kind of are failing. We're not concentrating on the use cases of PKI. PKI by itself does really nothing. It has to be paired with the use case. So one of the things that I think we need to do now, because most management types, when you talk about PKI, they get this glassy look on their face, and it's like they're not really kind of sure what it is. But the truth of the matter is PKI is everywhere. It's being used in many different things. So what we need to do is we need to take PKI out of context, and we need to start talking about the use cases that where PKI is the fundamental portion of that technology. And as the number of use cases has increased over the last decade or so, PKI now should be considered kind of like a basket. So if you have a basket of items inside that are important, you better make sure that that basket is as secure as possible. And we need to consider the costs of the failure of the use case, not necessarily the failure of the PKI. So if you move to the next slide, please. These are the use cases that we're tracking from PKI perspective. I mean, everybody here is most likely using PKI for SSL TLS. That is the beginning of PKI. That's where PKI kind of started. But over the last basically 2 decades, there have been many, many more use cases that are relying on the structural power, the structural security of PKI. So one of the things that you're going to see on your screen is going to be a kind of a survey. So if you could, if you would, if you can, for that matter, select all the items that your company is currently using PKI for. We'd love to see where the majority is going to be. Obviously, like I said earlier, the majority is going to be an SSL TLS. But how many people here are using it for bring your own device or the Internet of Things or code signing or even container protection? We're very curious about that. If you can do it, please fill out that survey and select the items that you're on there. But all of these things are for the use of PKI. The other thing that you might find interesting, and if you want after this presentation, I'm more than happy to send you this list, is to show this list to your management. show this list to them. So it's not necessarily the 3-letter acronym that's failing if something goes wrong with PKI. It's any one of these use cases that's failing. I think that kind of changes the discussion that you might have with your management. Next slide, please. So here we go. The top reasons PKIs fail. Most of the time, it's expired certificate revocation lists, CRLs. That's where we find most of our customers that have a PKI failure. They call us and they're like, oh, this is stopped. And it's like, what's going on? First thing we look for is CRLs. And that's pretty much the top reason why we've seen PKIs fail. The second one is just the plain old expired C8 certificate. We have lots of companies that are still monitoring their certificates on spreadsheets. And the only reason they're monitoring on spreadsheets is because when they generate the certificate or renew the certificate, they put it into the spreadsheet. Well, they might be missing something that's kind of hidden away within the PKI that they didn't know about. So it's important to be able to get an extraction of an inventory for all the certificates there. And the other one we have that causes a lot of the PKI failures are HSMs. Lunas specifically have the ability to house all the keys and certificates in a partition. If that partition starts to get too big, the HSM is designed to stop working. There's one thing people don't understand is that most of the time, if you've got a security product, you want, if it gets overflowed or if it stops working, you don't want it to stop working in an open condition. You want it to stop working in a closed condition. The reason you do that is because if the hackers know that all you got to do is bring something down, they're going to spend their time trying to bring the thing down. So you want to make sure that all these systems that are designed to stop working under a failure are consistently working, and that's where you have to kind of monitor HSMs. And we're going to do a demonstration on this a little bit later with Lindsay. So next slide, please. Here's a kind of a horror story that I wanted to kind of showcase with regard to a failure of a CRL. So in this particular company is an energy company, and they had a CRL expire on a service ticketing system 2 weeks before a tornado came into their town. So in that 2-week period, no tree limbs had fallen onto power lines, so they did not even know that the system was in that state, in a failure state. And then, as tornadoes do, they brought down a couple of tree limbs on top of power lines, and they had a crews ready to go out and remove the tree limbs and put the power lines back up and to get their customers' power back in place. And lo and behold, they started to try and send out a ticketing system, or ticketing out to the crews, and they couldn't. And they tried desperately to figure out why they couldn't. And it took some time, and they realized that after a long period of time that the reason was because the CRL for the certificate for the service ticketing system had expired. And once they were able to reissue the CRL, everything was back operational again. But that took hours. So they had customers that were in the dark for hours. And talk about the serious loss of reputation there. And you got some really upset people that they can't watch TV, they can't make dinner, they can't do all this type of stuff, only because they had a ticketing system that stopped them from doing this. Now, this is where we talked about earlier that this is not necessarily a failure of the PKI, it's a failure of the ticketing system. Management needs to know that the PKI is underpinning the ticketing system, and that's the system that needs to be concentrating on. And what I wanted to just kind of give you a reminder here is if you know of there's an old poem that was penned by, of all people, Benjamin Franklin back in the late 1700s called For the Want of a Horseshoe Nail. And the kind of poem goes, because of a horseshoe nail, the horseshoe was lost, and then the horse was lost, and the rider was lost, and the battle was lost, and the war was lost, and the kingdom was lost. And it's kind of all for the want of a horseshoe nail. I want you to kind of remember this image. These little things within our PKIs, these little things within these use cases are causing a potential cascade of events that would occur that would lose the reputation for the organization. And if it's serious enough, they might get sued. And it's all for something as small as a CRL within a organization. So I want you to remember this image, that these things within the organization, a CRL, certificate, an HSM, very small parts of an organization's security system, but they can be so damaged if they're not monitored properly. So move on to the next slide, please. So how do you get PKI to prevent outages? You can monitor your certificates, you can monitor your CRLs, and you can monitor your HSMs. And if they're all successfully monitored, you'll get advance notice of something that's going to occur, and you can take preventive steps long before they occur. So this is where I'm going to kind of pass it off to Lindsay. And Lindsay, you didn't make a single comment. Was I talking too fast in this presentation? Was what I said, anything I said you'd like to comment on before you go into your demonstration?
Well, what you said is awesome, Brad. I think one of the things that I want to help underpin with this presentation is the number one failure for PKI is the expired certificates, the CA certificates, or expired CRILs. That results in about 80% of all PKI outages, and that's according to both Keyfactor and DigiCert's kind of State of the Union. It's really amazing that organizations of all sizes just lack that visibility into these assets. As Brad mentioned, a lot of organizations are using spreadsheets. Most CLM solutions don't actually include those objects in their inventory. So it creates kind of a big gap here. And one of the things that we really focused on over the last few months in Spotlight is how do we create that visibility in a meaningful way? So I'm just going to kind of jump in here into that first screen, the PKI certificate status. So we've really made a distinction in our solution on what are the certificates that are used to run the PKI. So your NDES TLS certificates, signing and encryption, your OCSP, and your CA certificates. And we want to just see at a glance where they are. Are they expired? Are they valid? Are they chaining properly? Are the locations they're published to actually okay? So not just is the PKI working and publishing and updating these objects, but can we get to these endpoints where we expect these files to exist? So we can see here, we have a CA certificate that's hosted at 2 locations, and one of those locations is actually offline. So because of the way Spotlight works and we can subscribe to all of these changes and statuses, you can start to get a lot of these pre-failure indicators that could impact the operation of your PKI. So not just your CA certificates are expiring or have entered an expiry period, but some of these locations, AIA and CDP locations, are offline. And all at a glance, so across all your AD forests, across all of the CAs that you're monitoring, it pulls it all into a single view, so you don't have to remote into all of these systems. You can actually view the certificates, download them all from this single UI. And much like the PKI certificate status screen, we have a similar view, but for CRILs. Are the CRILs available? Are they publishing? Are the locations healthy? Can we get to the locations, etc.? So we've really focused on the operational aspect of how do we provide visibility into these critical and somewhat fragile assets for your PKI.
Your horseshoe nail.
Exactly. And
yeah,
then
one of the things that would have been interesting to have done on this webinar, which we didn't, was how many people have had a CRIL or certificate expire without their knowledge. That would have been a kind of an interesting thing to ask. So hopefully, I'm not going to ask that question. They can't add it to this webinar, but think to yourself, has that happened to you before? My guess is that it probably has sometime, and it always happens at the absolute worst possible time. Much like my utility discussion. I mean, it doesn't happen, when everything is working properly. It happens during the course of an emergency.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, according to the Keyfactor and DigiCert, most organizations have experienced at least one outage, and an outage could be a brownout, it could be a small system, a ticketing system, or it could be, you know, the main firewall or VPN. So the outages vary in terms of impact to the organization, but
well, it goes back to that my comment about, you know, the outage on a PKI is not the outage of PKI; it's the outage of the use case that's using
right.
PKI.
Yeah, exactly. So just quickly circling back, we also have another screen here showing the endpoints, all the published locations for CDP, AI assets, and then just a quick overview on what the blast radius is if one of those endpoints goes down. Okay. And then I'll jump over here into another one of our pre-failure indicators. So it's most systems or homegrown solutions really work on kind of that reactive standpoint where you're looking at events after they've occurred. So we really wanted to shift the paradigm with the inclusion of the screens I just shared with you. How do we start identifying failure points before they cause a brownout or a full outage? So we can go in here and look at any of the agents that we're monitoring, and we have a patent pending technology called IsAlive. You know, IsAlive is a status indicator of the overall health of a particular service. So in this case, we're looking at the CA and the IsAlive status. And what we do is we actually run a battery of tests consistently in real time, 24/7, and we're evaluating, can the CA do the job that it's intended to do? So it's not just enough to say the CA is running, but is the certificate chain valid? Are the private keys available? Is the CA certificate available? Interfaces, etc. And if you're using HSMs, that layers on an additional layer of visibility where we can say the HSM modules associated with the CA are all online, or are they in a particular failure condition? One of the really interesting things that we've learned about with HSMs is they like to fail silently, especially since most organizations generally have multiple modules or partitions associated with a PKI. You will never have immediate visibility into whether or not the HSM is actually healthy or in a potential failure state. We actually had a customer who had HSM with Encipher HSM with a couple of modules. 3 of the 4 of their modules had failed, and the last one was on its last legs and failed and took the whole system down, and they had 0 visibility. So what we can see here is we have a scenario where we have 4 modules on our Encipher device, and one of them is actually in a dead state. The battery's actually failed. So the CA is actually working as it's intended. The HSM is delivering the private key when it's requested, but you don't know that you're kind of in this ticking time bomb state because you're starting to lose some of those modules. We also have that visibility for Lunas as well. So we can monitor both the health of on-prem Luna or the data protection on demand, the cloud Luna devices. So we can see here, we have another scenario where one of our partitions in this case has been zeroized because it filled up. And for people who are familiar with Lunas, when they fill up, the partition locks itself down and will effectively stop providing those private keys.
And it's important to note that what we're looking at here is just a monitor of the HSMs. We have no login to the HSM. This is not from a management perspective. We cannot do anything to the HSM through this interface. And with the typical hardware security module vendor, you usually don't have a multiple HSM view because you have to log into each of them. In this particular case, there's no login required.
Exactly. And of course, we have kind of the same IsAlive availability for NDES. there's actually more tests, there's more moving parts with an NDES system. So we look at both the encryption and signing certificates, we look at IIS status, we look at whether the CA is available, and whether or not the encryption and signing certificates are the private keys are actually available to the IIS application pool. So any one of these conditions can fail and create that outage in your NDES or your PKI and prevent it from properly validating certificates or issuing new certificates. So we spent quite a bit of time creating that pre-failure visibility so that you have as much notice as possible prior to any sort of real outage or brownout.
And I don't know if we're going to have time to go into it, but all those, the status changes can be set to alert. So it's not like you have to be looking at the screen on a 7 by 24 hour basis. You can let the system alert you to a change in the status. So like with the partition space, I mean, you might be at 98% filled up, and you've set an alert for 90 or 99%, something like that. Upon it's reaching that state, it's going to send you alert that state has occurred.
Yeah, Spotlight is very configurable in terms of notifications. We have native integrations into Splunk. We have a generic syslog API as well, where you can pull data into any other systems outside of Splunk. And we have a robust email notification system. So if there are critical events that you want to subscribe to outside of what's falling into your SOC or your NOC, then you can say, I want alerts at whatever threshold you defined. It's customizable by certificate, by CRIL, by device type. So Lunas have different thresholds, etc. And those can go to the specified parties, whether it's a service desk or whether it's a PKI admin, so they could have visibility on that. So you don't actually have to live in Spotlight to have all the value of those changes and statuses. We find that the alerts, whether through your SIM tool or your emails, are really the starting point for your investigation. And we provide a lot of visibility to help understand what is happening within your system. So rather than having to remote in, it's all single pane of glass. I can compare configurations across different types of data. So I can look at my CDP AIA for all my CAs side by side. So it becomes this productivity multiplier beyond just the alerting. So as you experience, let's say a CRIL failed to publish, you get an alert that the CRIL has failed to publish. Now you need to go do an investigation. Maybe you need to just go into that system and refresh that CRIL manually, but you have all of the tools and right at your fingertips without having to figure out where it happened.
Lindsay, thank you very much. And this goes back to a kind of a comment that there's no excuse anymore to not monitor this type of stuff, because PKI is now become so important within organizations. These types of systems should be monitored because if something were to happen within your PKI, it will bring down. Next slide, please. It'll bring down a use case that's important. There we go. So, so in summary, kind of just want to go through a couple of things here. I believe that PKI shouldn't be mentioned without its use case. So when you're talking to your management about PKI, mention the use case, mention code signing, bring your own device, Wi-Fi, VPN, Citrix, etc., and get your management to understand that this is PKI is a basket that assists in all these different technologies, and you've got to make sure that that basket that you have is as secure as possible. And understanding the status of your CLs and certificates and your HSMs is paramount to keeping your PKI healthy. And this system that you saw with PKI Spotlight will provide you with that reassurance that your PKI is healthy. And like I said, we haven't even gotten into the security aspects of PKI Spotlight. So, and also, I think you should kind of look at this is remember that horseshoe nail analogy that I used here. I think it's really important to understand that the little simple thing like a krill or certificate can have devastating effects to the organization. Now, you're also going to see it soon a survey, or not survey, questionnaire, that if you want to have a full-on demonstration of PKI Spotlight, Lindsay and I are more than happy to provide you with that demonstration so you can see it actually operating in a little more in depth. And then the other announcement I have is that we are going to have a webinar in December. We're going to have it on December 18th. So mark your calendars that at 10 o'clock Pacific time on December 18th, we're going to have another webinar. Now, I hope you all found this webinar helpful. Lindsay, thank you very much for your presentation. And I hope we see you again. And since we're right now exactly 1 week away from Thanksgiving, I wish everyone on this call a happy Thanksgiving. And we look forward to talking to you next week or next month, excuse me. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.